Hey, Scott, thanks so much for being a part of the podcast. How you doing, man?
Good, yourself?
I am doing well. Just got back from vacation, so that's always good, refreshing. I made several posts in the group about guilt-free play, which is incredibly important, and I have been horrible at doing it, so it was really good. So before we get too deep into conversation, because I know we're going to jump right into it, why don't you go ahead and let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a Marine vet. I served 13 years in the Marine Corps, and I'm a veteran mindset coach or life coach for veterans, essentially.
That's awesome. So definitely going to dig into that. You've been married?
Yes, 16 years,
Okay,
almost 16. It'll be 16 years in May.
right on. And kids?
I got a son, 8-year-old son.
All right. Well, welcome to the show. I'm super pumped to have you. And I just, it's funny because I get connected. I get referrals from people that I've had on the podcast. And in this case, Brian Alvey reached out and said, "You've got to talk to Scott Leeper." And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever.
Yeah,
And the only information I got from him basically was, I met Scott at a jiu-jitsu tournament, and knowing Brian and the fact that he does hard things all the time, he's
yeah,
always challenging himself, and that's really a theme that I'm really honed in on, because I think that's where growth happens. He said, "Scott's got a great story for you," so, man, jiu-jitsu. How long you been doing that?
honestly, I've only been doing jiu-jitsu for, I don't know, 7 months. My son was doing it for, he's been doing it for about 3 years, and so I've watched him. My first true love is the gym. I spend a lot of time weight training, but after watching him for so long, I decided it's time for me to get involved, and that could be something that me and him do together. So yeah, about 7 months.
Yeah, and you're in a competition already.
Yeah, yeah, that was interesting to say the least.
So, first of all, what was the mindset that got you from? I mean, at that time, you're probably 4 or 5 months into jiu-jitsu. I'm thinking this is a couple months ago. How does your mind go from, I'm brand new at this, I'm just going to go for a competition?
Um, it's for me, it's really a measurement of where I'm at. I don't measure myself against other people. I measure myself against myself, and I've been in multiple bodybuilding competitions, and so the competition mindset is just something that's a part of me at this point. So training jujitsu, I do it not because I want to be in the sport of jujitsu. I do it to be able to defend myself and defend my family. However, by competing in the jiu-jitsu tournament, that gave me an opportunity to actually see where I was as far as my skill level was concerned. So yeah, it definitely showed where my strong suits are, and definitely showed where I had some improvements that needed to be made. So yeah, it was a good experience.
Yeah, I've got several directions I want to go with this. So let's walk through that. Tell us about that competition. I mean, you kind of giggled, so I'm thinking there's a little bit of, or chuckled is probably a more manly word.
Yeah,
There's a story here.
yeah. Well, so I'm 38, and I went into this tournament and I signed up for Masters, and Masters I think it was 30 to 45 or 35 to 45, something like that. And when I saw the bracket, there was only 5 of us, and so which means I was only going to compete twice. And they told us, they were like, "Listen, if you want to be put in any other bracket, go ahead. Just let us know, and we'll add you to the bracket." So seeing as I'm only going to do 2 matches, I'm like, man, I want to do more than this. So I went and told them to add me to the adult bracket. Now the adult bracket is all the younger guys. Yeah. I went from having 2 matches to having 7 matches. 5 of those went the distance. They went 5-minute rounds, the full 5 minutes, and they were all within about a 35-minute timeline. So yeah, in 2 of the 2 matches, I did 2 matches against the Masters guys. One of them being Brian Alvey. He beat me up pretty good. We had a good roll together, actually, but he ended up winning that match. But then these other matches were against these young guys, and I don't have the stamina I used to. So by about the time I got to that 6th and 7th round, that 6th and 7th match, and these guys are still bouncing around, jumping around. I'm like, I'm already hunched over, almost got my hands on my knees, like, okay, here we go again. Like, I learned my lesson very quickly. I'm going to stick to my age bracket next time. But I lost every match. And the thing is, the first 3 matches, the first match, that was the first fighting match I've ever been in. And it was the first time I had gotten into, we'll call it a fight, with somebody I didn't know since probably high school. Now, I served in the Marine Corps and we did some grappling and Marine Corps martial arts and that kind of thing. But as far as in this type of setting, I've never done something like this. And I got tapped pretty quickly. He submitted me, he choked me out. And then the second match, actually, the guy, he was a younger guy. He was like 20, I think he was like 22 years old. Big kid too. I mean, just big guy. And he went to put me in an arm bar, but I had been able to slip out. But for whatever reason, the ref thought that I tapped, and so she called the match. I was a little bit irritated by it, so I went up to the table and asked him if I can get a rematch, because I'm not gonna concede a match that I didn't tap to. They gave us another match. Me and him. It was the very next match that I was in was with him again, and this time he puts me into a belly down armbar. So the other lesson I learned there was be careful what I wish for, because he got me good that time. Yeah. So, but every time, after every match, I got my wife and my son watching me. And a lot of times, us as guys, like, we don't want our family to see us lose. We don't want our families, especially as men, we don't want our families to see us getting beat at something, especially like fighting. But for me, it was a beautiful opportunity to give my son a very crucial lesson. And that was failing forward, what failing forward looks like. For a lot of us growing up, the narrative is, don't lose, don't suck, don't show emotion. You got to be the best at everything. And it's this misconception of what an alpha male is. And it goes into toxic masculinity. I don't really agree with that term. I don't agree with the term toxic masculinity. It's misunderstood masculinity in my opinion. And so, by me losing every match, the person that walked out of that building with the biggest trophy was my son, because after every match and losing, I went and sat with him and I talked with him, and he's 8 years old. So he's extremely impressionable right now. And I talked to him about failing forward, about being willing to suck at something, to learn and to grow. And what he also saw was every match I got incrementally better. And then I would go up and I'd have conversations with the guys that beat me and joke around with them and laugh with them and get to know them and connect with them. And in my opinion, no piece of metal in there was near as valuable as what those 7 losses were able to do for my son.
Yeah. You bring up something that I feel really, really strongly about, and that's that, I mean, you nailed it on the head. And when we say we ultimately don't want our wives and kids to see us fail. Like, I think instinctually we have this idea that we need to be the victor of all times, everything that we go through. But really what I've learned and what I've done with my kids is, I didn't learn this till later, so I didn't actively show them. I actively show them now. But the idea is to talk them through the big failures and the failures that I've had, because if we don't, they're not going to know how to deal with it when they go through it. And it's just going to be a repeat. I think that's it's an art every father really needs to tackle. Do you think your son understood the brevity of what was going on, or, what was his response?
Honestly, I think he was more scared than anything. Seeing dad get beat like that, I think that, I think it maybe made him a little nervous. because just like all kids, they view their dad as their hero, their superhero, and and so I think it was more of he's a little bit apprehensive, but at the same time, it's one of those things where it's just planting that seed, and allowing that seed to grow and cultivate, and at the same time, I continue to water it, because as an entrepreneur, I've lost countless times. I get told no, and I get ignored, and all of these other things, and so losses happen. And so if he continues to watch me failing forward, that seed's just going to grow. So maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Only time will tell. But the other piece to this too is the reason why I'm so intent on just planting those seeds and allowing them to grow on their own, and continuing to watering these seeds, is I had just the opposite. Like I love my dad, and he was never abusive. The issue was, and I wrote a book about this as well. My dad suffered from alcoholism for a very long time. I think his entire adult life. And back in 2012, I was a sergeant stationed at Camp Lejeune in the Marine Corps, and I ended up having to come home, and I had to take him off life support. I watched him take his last breath because of his alcohol addiction, and that marked me, and that affected me greater than anything's ever affected me. And that was 3 months before Jackson was born. And I remember a conversation I had with my dad that was extremely eye-opening before he died. We didn't talk for like 2.5 years, almost the entire time I was stationed in Okinawa. And he, we finally made amends. It was over something stupid, like $250. It was dumb, but we didn't talk for 2.5 years. Right. And so we were supposed to, we were supposed to meet at my sister's house. I came into town, and we were supposed to meet at my sister's house. We just made amends. And it was around Thanksgiving time. He didn't show up. Well, he lived just down the street from my sister's house. And so I walked down there, and I knock on a door, and he answers it, and he's already swaying back and forth. I mean, he's already trashed. And I kind of walked in, and I had that disappointed look on my face. I was just pissed at this point. And I kind of walked in. I just took stock of what I was looking at. I hadn't talked to him in 2.5 years. And I look around, and he's just in this little shack apartment, trashed living room. I look in the kitchen, and he's got empty alcohol containers, glass, plastic, cans, bottles, like stacks as high as a countertop. And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, it looked like a recycling plant. And I turned around and looked at him, and I was frustrated. I said, "Dad, what are you doing?" And he sat down on his chair, and of course he had an open beer in front of him, and tears start flowing. At this point, he starts sobbing. He says, "Look at me." He says, "I'm fat. I'm nasty. Nobody loves me. Nobody wants me. This is my escape." And I didn't know what to say. I think I said something. I don't remember, because I kind of glossed over at that point. So I'd never seen that. My dad I compare my dad to Robin Williams. Whenever he was around people, his medicine was making other people laugh. But as soon as people were gone, and it was just him, it was him and his demons and his own self-hatred. And he didn't know how to deal with that. So he took to alcohol, and it just made it worse. But it was in that moment where I started to understand why he drank so much. And then in his death, he actually taught me ambition. He taught me drive. He taught me self-worth, self-care, self-love, self-trust. He taught me what it meant to take care of myself through his own inaction. And so at the beginning of my son's life, and we'll get into this here in a moment, but at the beginning of my son's life, I was not that example. I was turning into the same example as my father. And so now, because I've been able to do the work for myself, and because I do what I do now with vets and with coaching and that kind of thing, it's become my mission to make sure that at any point I'm teaching him the lessons that I didn't get when I was younger.
Yeah.
I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
no, it's awesome. So his death basically ultimately led you to realize that you can shortcut that with your son tremendously and your own life. I mean, I think well, I know a lot of guys get stuck in the trap. You said you were kind of stuck in the same trap probably early in your marriage. It's pretty common for men, is they kind of go through this cycle where they start to do things that they later realize was not the right path. What was your wake-up call? What was your own wake-up call? You know, you said you're kind of going down the same path as your dad.
Shortly after his death, you know, my son was born 3 months later. By his first birthday, I was having an affair with my wife. We weren't doing good at all. I told her I wanted a divorce. She moved back up to Indiana. I was still down there. Luckily we worked things back out and we're still together now. But the command had found out about the affair. And after 13 years, after multiple deployments to Iraq, I was kicked out of the Marine Corps with an other than honorable discharge. And mental health played a key role in that because I had, you know, they had diagnosed me with anxiety, with depression. And then it wasn't until after I got out, like they misdiagnosed me, said I didn't have PTSD when I was in, but then the VA quickly said, no, you have chronic PTSD. So I had all of these things. Now, none of that is an excuse for the actions that I took, but it took losing my Marine Corps career, which my dad had even said I would be a lifer. And so that was an even further gut punch when I got kicked out, because he believed in me being a Marine so much. I mean, even when we didn't talk for 2.5 years, he always told people how proud he was of his Marine son. And so that was even more of a gut punch. But it was, you know, when I got out, there was a part of me that knew I wanted to help people, didn't know what that looked like, but fired from multiple jobs and forced to resign from jobs and all of these things that it was just I don't think it was one specific wake up call. That was really the catalyst event. But after my first job, it was a staffing job. I got fired from that job. Second job was working for a nonprofit that funded rehab facilities. And I was forced to resign from that one. And then the third one was working for a garage door company. I got fired from that one as well. The thing about each of these, though, I took something from each of them. And for the nonprofit that funded their rehab facility, I actually spoke to the men in that rehab facility and shared my dad's story. And so that all led to when I was in a garage door company, I found bodybuilding, started competing. So when I got fired from that job, I became a personal trainer, which led to becoming a coach. So it was all really, it's just like anything else where you had the catalyst event, but then I've made it a point to embrace this journey that I've been on, that I'll continue on until the day I'm 6 feet under.
Yeah. I love hearing like the trajectory or the timeline of men's journeys. And it just, life's got to suck before it gets better. I mean, if someone tells you differently, if someone tells you it's all been roses, unicorns, and rainbows, they're probably lying. And the thing that I chat with a lot of guys about is if they're going through a really hard time, it's like, you can take this opportunity to grow, or you can use this as an excuse to shrink. It's totally up to you. And I've had to reframe my mind, and it's made a complete difference in everything that I do, the outcomes, the success. Reframe my mind that failures or setbacks are opportunities to get better, grow. And I actually look at them as success, in that they're forging the end product.
Mhm.
Like the mistakes I made raising my young boys, the mistakes I've made in business, the mistakes I've made as a husband, those are just forging a really, really sharp tool into who I am now,
Yeah.
where I feel like I'm able to excel in those times. And then I'm able to see challenges now a little earlier, and reframe how I'm thinking about them, so that I can come out on top. And it sounds like that's pretty much your philosophy.
Yeah. Listen, the masterpiece is not created with a single brushstroke. It starts with the first brushstroke. And one of the things that I had to learn was, life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. But the problem is, too many people look at the challenges that they face, the failures that they've had, as life happening to them. The thing is, if I didn't, like, my dad's death is not a curse. I used to view it as such, but it's not a curse. My dad's death is a gift, because if that didn't happen exactly the way it happened, we wouldn't be on this call right now. I wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing with veterans. I may still be in. I'd probably be close to retirement. I would be close to retirement. But I would have been hating life, and who knows how many times I would have had to been away from family. Like, there's so many variables that take place, and we get so zoned in on what, the negative thing that happened that led to what didn't happen. Okay, what positive came out of that, and what good has happened since then? And there's an old Wayne Dyer saying that, if you want to see the things around you change, you have to change how you see the things around you. And that was exactly one of the things that I had to do at the very beginning. Was I had to start shifting my perspective about things and start seeing things from a different light. I did take, it's like drawing the number 6. To give you a quick illustration about this, you draw the number 6 on a piece of paper, and how do you shift your perspective about that number 6? Simply flip it upside down. You now have a number 9, right? It's the same thing with everything that happens in life. And you just have to ask yourself you have to stop judging the situation for what it is, because in judgment, there's no curiosity, and curiosity, there's no judgment. So if you can start living life through the lens of a curious child, and you start to see how these things can actually benefit you, and how you can learn from these things and grow from these things, at that point, life starts to shift for you, because there's opportunities being presented that you don't even see them, because you're so focused on something bad to happen. And I'm not saying like bad things don't happen. No, bad things happen to good people all the time. And that's how life is sometimes. But how are you viewing that situation that took place? You can't change the event, but you can change the frame. I've talked about this a lot with people. You can't change the event. Events happen. Things take place. We can't explain them. It's just coronavirus. The coronavirus happened. In some people died from it. Some people lost their jobs from it. You got different presidents coming in, and people don't agree with it. Some people do. Some people don't. And all of these things happen that people are not understanding. The thing is, these events we cannot change. What we can do is change the frame. Now, the frame is filled with a few different things. It starts with a label. How are you labeling that event? When you label that event, it creates a meaning. That meaning now has an emotion attached to it. The emotion has a reaction attached to it, and that reaction creates an end result. Take my dad's death for the example. If I would have stayed bitter, I would have continued drinking. And the end result might have been my son having to do the same thing to me.
Right. Yeah. I was going through a certification course, and I was working with the coach, and he said, it was just one-on-one. He's like, he had me title some events from my past, some significant events. And most of my significant events that I see as negative were in middle school. I mean, they were school related. They were almost always with adults, not usually with kids. And so I titled like 4 or 5 different events. And then I wrote the story out, as it would, like, to share it with somebody. I wrote the story out, and then I read it. I'm like, there was a common theme in all of these, is the way I had perceived and personified and believed those events happened were all very identical. I was a victim. And I let that for years, 20, 30 years, control outcomes of current things. The way that I viewed things happening in my daily life were still structured around the way that I interpreted what happened back then. I reinterpreted there, retold the story in my, like, looked through that story. I'm like, man, this isn't, I controlled the outcome. Like, yes, that happened to me, but the way I responded mentally and emotionally was controlling my future. And all I had to do was reframe that response in my head. Like, yeah, I need to own that I screwed this up, or, I had no control over that situation. Time doesn't define who I am.
Yeah.
And that was major breakthrough coming through, like situations. You don't know how relevant those past experiences you have in your head when your language wrapped around it is totally effed up. It was totally screwed up. Now I'm like, man, I was a victim for 30 plus years where I didn't have to be. I did that to myself. I interpreted it that way myself, and I interpreted it wrong. And that is my fault. And here I am, and I am going to crush it next time. And that is, I think you're talking about the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The thing is, we make the mistake of thinking reality is exactly what it is.
Right.
But there's a theory that I completely align with. And that's, what if reality isn't what we think it is? What if what we think creates our reality?
I think it creates the way we perceive our reality, for sure.
Absolutely.
No doubt about it.
And perception is interpretation.
So I was reading today, and I actually put this on social media. I was reading today, the obstacle is the way, and something just smacked me across the face. And it's something that Ryan Holiday wrote in that book. He said, when we believe in the obstacle more than the goal, which will inevitably triumph. I was like, oh, I've been paying attention to obstacles, financial, professional, athletic, all these things. I've been paying attention to the obstacles. Guess what's going to happen? I'm going to fail. It's going to triumph, because that's where my mind is. Same with stories we're telling ourselves in the head. Same with the narrative we have when a situation occurs.
Yeah. And that's the same thing that I've fallen into that trap plenty of times as an entrepreneur too.
Yeah.
Being the ignored and not getting the no's and that kind of thing. And at times needing the money and it doesn't come through, and all these things. And you're right. There's been plenty of times where I too, because listen, these are all things that we talk about and that we believe in and that we practice, but we have bad days too, where we still get into our heads. Right. And this whole conversation, like, for anybody listening, let's not get it twisted. Let's not think for a moment that we are immune to getting into to not getting into our own heads, right? Like, coaches will tell you, like, we too have coaches, and we too have days where we need somebody to tell us that thing that we need to hear. And it might be something that we say and that we work with people on, but sometimes we got to hear it from somebody else. And so we fall into these traps, we fall into these pitfalls. But just like you read this book this morning, that's the other piece too, is this self-education. Like, people think education is only in a degree. It's not. And I'm not downplaying degrees. Like if people have degrees, awesome. I personally don't. Not that I wouldn't want to, but there's no disparity. I'm not talking disparities here, but what I'm saying is people think education is only in school. There are so many books out there. The one you mentioned, great book. The Power of Habit, that's sitting on your shelf behind you, phenomenal book. When people start to read and they start to learn and they start to implement, they will start to grow. And us as men, we've got to do that.
You said something right there that has been a big thing for me thinking about, because so the story goes is I was listening to an audiobook. I hadn't read, I have a master's degree. Yay for me. I have a bachelor's in psychology. I have a master's in education. So I've got this degree, big degree. I used to hang it on the wall behind me because it defined a little bit of who I was, right? Which it doesn't. And fast forward, I've been teaching for 10 years and I'm listening to an author. Someone gave me an audiobook when it was on CD. And he said something about the number of books you read. And he's like, readers are leaders. It's just super simple statement. I'm like, oh, like other than that book that I was listening to, I hadn't read any book in its entirety since I graduated with my master's degree.
Yeah.
And I started to devour books, but something that, and I learned a lot. I devoured them, but something that you said that made the next level difference that I implemented 2 years ago was implementation. You can listen to your ears bleed, you can read to your eyes bleed, but unless you take those concepts and put them into practice, just like you have a banner, a poster or sign on the wall that says, watch your actions for they become habits, watch your habits for they become your character. But until you make those things habits, you get these great nuggets from these books, but until you implement them, they mean nothing. Knowledge is one thing. Action is wisdom. Action of knowledge leads to wisdom, and wisdom is so much better than just flat out knowledge. I think that's pretty much what you were saying with a college degree and such, because I don't use my college degree for anything other than it's, I've learned from that experience.
They say knowledge is power. I don't agree. Knowledge,
I don't either.
Is simply that. It's knowledge. It's filling up brain matter with information. Nothing wrong with that. There's extremely smart people out there that have a lot of knowledge, but implementation is growth. And growth is a very difficult thing for a lot of people. To start growing, you have to start practicing. For a lot of people, they've been practicing feeling bad for so long. So it's very challenging to start practicing feeling good. And some people may even feel fake when they first start doing it. But the more they practice it, the better they get at it, just like anything else.
Oh, dude. I do. John Gordon, an author that I love, has a podcast. It's something positivity. It's incredible. He's just like always positive. I'm like, how can you have the energy for that? And he talked about when he started doing these 10-minute gratitude walks or thankful walks. He calls them some like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like you walk for 10 minutes and do nothing but say what you're grateful for. Well, how awkward was that? I started doing that. I go on 45-minute to an hour walks every morning. Very, butt crack of dawn. That's what I do to set my mind. After I do a little devotional, I'll listen to it while I'm walking. After that, the very first thing I do, the only thing I do, no exceptions, is out loud gratitude. And I have from this point, I know it's about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That was so freaking awkward. It was so awkward for probably a month. Now I do it out loud. And if I don't get it, it completely reframes my day
Yeah.
because my thoughts are on all the amazing things that I have. Everything can be crashing down around me. I still have my wife. I still have my kids. They're healthy. Like your frame is completely different, and it's all about practice, and practice leads to habits. And I don't think knowledge is power. I think what we all should be after is wisdom, and wisdom comes into play with knowledge, action, habit forming, your thought life, your character. Like, what they say, the wealthiest man ever was King Solomon, and he was also known as the wisest man. So even if you're like, hey, I want wealth, well, then seek wisdom.
Yeah. Well, wisdom comes from growth. The thing about growth too is when we're kids, and my son's going through this right now where, sometimes his knee will hurt or his shoulder hurts or something, right? And I'm like, dude, it's just growing pains, man. We've all been through it. It's growing pains. And we've all been through it. And when we get to about 16, 17, 18 years old, and we hit that peak growth point where we're going to be physically for the rest of our lives. For me, it was 5'9", and somehow I've shrunken it. So I'm now 5'8". I don't understand that. I've already started the old person shrinking. But anyway, yeah. And we think that growing pains are over. Growing pains are just beginning, because at 16, 17 years old of growing pains, it's physical and it's psychological. We don't realize it's also psychological. We don't see it as such, right? We just see it as things happening to us. But from 18 till our dying day, it's psychological growing pains. That's the first difference. The second difference is it now becomes a choice. We can choose to grow through what we're going through. We can choose to remain stuck, disgruntled, irritated, mad at the world. And one way or the other, life is going to get challenging. But a lot of people, they do the easy thing by staying disgruntled and mad at everybody else and pointing fingers at everybody else. But by doing that easy thing, and it's easy, I've done it. It's easy. The problem with doing the easy thing is life continues to get hard. If we do the hard thing and start to look at those three fingers pointing back at us, and okay, how can I grow? What can I learn from this? What are the good things that are coming out of this? What are the blessings in disguise? Like those kind of things. That's the hard thing. That's the uncomfortable thing. But when you start doing the hard thing, life starts to get easier. That's how you obtain wisdom, is by embracing the growth points.
Discomfort.
Absolutely. Get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah. I've said this 1,000 times on this podcast. If you want growth, the opposite side of growth is comfort. So don't sit in comfort, because you're not going to grow there.
Yep. Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you that jiu-jitsu tournament was not good.
Yeah. Coming full circle on the jiu-jitsu, because I haven't stepped into it yet. Life's circumstances haven't gotten me into a jiu-jitsu gym yet. But one, I've heard that it's pretty mentally challenging, like exhausting, like your cognitive ability kind of wanes. I can't imagine doing seven rounds in the time, or 7 matches in the time you did it, because I'm sure your brain just kind of like had a little bit of a meltdown as well as a physical meltdown. So I wanted to circle back around on the protection, because you mentioned like this is one reason I want to be prepared. I want to be able to defend my family. This has been a conversation inside of our group, and I think it's something that I have really been focusing on. In fact, my wife and I had a very serious conversation with her today. I'm like, some of the circumstances happening right now in the world, and the government is really starting to push some things that like we're not really fully believing in. And we're like, what happens if they say, do this, or you don't get X, Y, or Z? And I'm like, we have to have this conversation. We can't wait till a moment happens when it says, oh, you guys didn't comply. Now this is going to happen. We have to be in line with where do our beliefs, how far are we willing them to be pushed? Is there a breaking point? And if there's not, what is plan? And I think planning for your family, defending your family, firearms, you should know how to use a firearm in case that comes. Your body, probably what you really need to be figuring out, being physically fit and knowing how to defend your family physically. What about jiu-jitsu made you think, yeah, that's the right choice for defending my family? Because I know you know how to use firearms.
Well, yeah, a little bit. The thing about jiu-jitsu is, when I think of protecting my family with jiu-jitsu, I think being at a restaurant or being out somewhere. Maybe it's my wife and I, we want to go have a drink together, date night. And here's the thing, like, I'm 5'8", about 209. I'm wide, and it's muscle. I spend a lot of time weight training. And there have been times where somebody with a level of insecurity, you catch the eye where they kind of look you up and down like, psh. Now, the thing about bodybuilders and people that have a lot of muscle, if you put a bodybuilder in a jiu-jitsu match with a jiu-jitsu practitioner, the practitioner will win every time. But when a bodybuilder does jiu-jitsu, now that's just adding to the dynamic. And I'll talk about one of the things that I had to learn, just going, the mental game at the very beginning. But so for me, it's, if we're out at a restaurant or something and somebody decides to be insecure, or maybe it's just, I stepped on somebody's shoe that it was just the worst day of their life, and I'm catching the brunt of it. What I love about jiu-jitsu is not only can I defend myself and protect myself, but by utilizing particular techniques, I'm able to protect the aggressor as well. Right.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And so for me, like, I would much rather be able to put somebody into some type of submission to protect me and that person than striking. Now, striking definitely has its warrants and definitely has its pros. Certainly not taken away from striking, but for me, I would rather get into the clinch with the guy, submit him, get him into some sort of submission move to where, okay, we need to calm down, or you're going to take a quick nap. You know what I mean? So that's really why jiu-jitsu. And one of the things that I had to learn at the very beginning, I spent with the amount of time that I've spent weight training, in the gym, you're muscling everything, right? You're squeezing, contractions, all of that. And what I had to learn in jiu-jitsu was it's the complete opposite. Us meatheads get on the jiu-jitsu mat, and we're trying to muscle everything, and we're wearing ourselves out quickly. I remember the first time I got on a mat with anybody, I'm like trying to like muscle him and everything, and he's got his eyes closed, and he's just kind of,
oh my gosh.
And I'm like, what is this sorcery? But I had to learn that I don't have to muscle everything, and this is where the mental piece comes in, where you go to the gym and it's war. It's time to go to war, and yeah, you can get the jiu-jitsu matches where it's the same thing. But when you're rolling with somebody, you're grappling, and it's just Saturday morning where you're grappling with guys in your gym, you go maybe 60%. So you're learning particular moves, but you're doing it to where you're protecting each other. You're doing it to where it's a flow, and it's not so much, two guys trying to beat the crap out of each other.
Yeah, that's really cool. What other things have you done? Well, first, let's back up. I really like what you said about it's protecting yourself, obviously your family or whoever's with you, but it's also protecting the other person. You made a statement. It could be their worst day in their life, and mistakes they make could lead to consequences that are not good. I mean, if they hurt you, they could end up in jail, and
Yeah.
maybe, and then that spins their life out of control. And by being able to subdue somebody who is out of control, you're not only doing yourself a favor, you're doing them a favor. And I think that's something that I haven't given a lot of thought to. I think it's really powerful to be able to, you're actually helping somebody in that situation.
Well, you think about, the situation that we're in, and mental health has any progress we've made with mental health took an extreme hit when COVID came around.
Yep.
You look at the branches of service, and suicide rates are up 20% across the board. Mental health has become a even more severe than what it already was, a more severe issue. And so, you've got somebody that they've been isolated for 2 months, haven't had any human interaction, haven't had any actual human contact. Humans have to have connection to other humans. And so by us not being able to do that, the mental health issue has gotten worse. And so it could be where they get out for the first time and maybe their anxiety is up a little bit because they've got the fear of contracting it, but they're trying to get out, or whatever the case is. We never know. Their wife could have just died. Something could have just happened to their kid. Their kid could have just been diagnosed with cancer. And we happen to be the one person that said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing. We just got into the crosshairs at the wrong time.
Yeah.
So we don't need to beat the holy crap out of this person. Submissions allow us to protect the other person as well.
Yeah, that's such a cool aspect that I hadn't really thought through. I think it's just it's a really cool thing. You said something about lockup and being kind of isolated from other people. I read, before any of this came out, I read a book by Brene Brown, and I don't agree with everything she says, but something that she quoted some stats from a researcher. One of them was that isolation from face-to-face real human interaction, actual physical interaction, the consequences or the health implement or the health side effects of that are worse than smoking 2 packs a day. Like worse. Like you have to have physical human face-to-face interaction or you will die a little inside. And so did you have your coaching practice in place? You coach veterans. Did you have it in place before COVID?
So I've been a coach for about 3 years, and
Okay.
but I wasn't coaching vets pre-COVID. COVID, this whole thing just made me pivot entirely. And kind of how that whole thing started was January of last year, I started a mentoring program at a local VFW for vets in the area. And the commander, the previous commander, had actually approached me and asked me if I would start one. And so I agreed to it. And we're still meeting first Monday of every month. And we were trying to use the Facebook events page, but we weren't really getting much traction. And so I decided I was going to create a Facebook group, and I titled it Vets Mentoring Vets. And when I first started this group, I started it with just the idea of just raising awareness about this mentoring group in the local community, and only adding vets in the area. But as I'm literally typing the description, I'm like, it's kind of, I'm missing the mark here. I could open this up to vets across the nation, and I could utilize my coaching abilities to work with other vets in other areas. And so I did. And within the first 30 days, 8,600 vets, active and reservists, joined this group. And so when I seen that, I'm like, okay, I clearly have hit a nerve here. And so I need to explore this more. And so on July 30th was when I launched Alpha Lima Charlie. And it continues to morph into what it's going to become. I'm right now working the community care angle, because the VA now has the community care program in place where they refer vets out in town for various services. So that and a couple other angles as well. And it's going to morph into what it's going to be, but it's certainly going to, I'm certainly going to continue reaching these vets, because vets already feel fairly isolated a lot of times anyway, because they when they go into the service, they have purpose, they have identity, they have a sense of direction, they have a sense of belonging. And when they leave the service, all of that's gone. And a lot of them are angry, and they don't even realize that's the reason. But once you put a face on it, they realize, oh my God, that's it. So that's now my mission, is to reach these vets in isolation and those that are dealing with challenges, and help them navigate it easier.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's great. And I think there's just so much. I actually know there's an incredible amount of need for services for vets that actually helps them get the tools to succeed, not just medication or, common therapies. We could probably go down a rabbit hole on that, but we both seem to have a very firm alignment in the importance of your language, the way you interpret events, and kind of working through from that angle. And I think I just highly promote that angle, because I know it's so effective from personal and from people I've talked to. So I think that's awesome, man. I hope that just blows up, because that would help many, many people. Man, it sounds like you're doing hard stuff every day.
And like I said earlier, you said the focus that you like to zone in on is doing the hard thing. And my response was that sounds like the definition of my life.
As it should be.
Yeah. And I certainly, I know that I'm not alone there, and I know that that's a lot of people's lives. And there have definitely been people that have been through much, much worse than I have. But it's always the same thing. The events don't change. We can't change them. And even if they were in our control, it happened in the past. It happened. Now we can't change it. But what we can do is change that frame. And when we can change that frame, life just gets easier.
Yep. Well, it's the analogy I've heard over and over again. It's, we both like working out. To build a muscle, you are actually breaking it down so that it rebuilds bigger. What we're talking about is building the muscle of dealing with stuff, building the muscle of setbacks, building the muscle intentionally going into things that are going to really challenge us, because it will, in a way, break us down. We can choose to let it break us down and stay in that broken down. Unlike the muscle, it won't continue, it won't grow. Or we can choose to rebuild and grow bigger. And it's just like my mission to get men to understand this. And I seek out daily, some challenge. It can be physical, it can be mental, it can be business. I think business always comes at me. There's a challenge that's going to help me grow daily. It's one of those things, like, I think entrepreneurs are just kind of tuned into, and you're an entrepreneur by all means. And is that we know that if we push forward, there's going to be challenge every day, and we can use it to break us down, or we can use it to build us up. And comfort is not comfortable. It's complacency. It's numbness. And that's for nobody.
Yeah. And there's a couple things to add to this too, because there's guys saying, well, how do I, what, like you mentioned a little bit ago about language. What do you mean language? So I know that there's guys that are going to listen to this that are wondering what you mean. What do you mean your language is important? And then and I'll talk about that. And then the other piece too is there's a lot of guys that may listen to this that might go, dude, I am not talking about my problems with anybody.
Right.
Right. So the first thing, language. Why language is so important. It's the difference between moving away from and moving towards language. When you're saying moving away, what I mean by moving away from language, that's when it comes to money. I don't want to be broke. Right. Your brain doesn't process the negative. So that's like, okay, don't think about being broke. In order for you to not think about being broke, what do you have to think about? Being broke. So when you're thinking about being broke, all you're doing is indicating to your brain where to put the focus. Okay, focus on being broke. So that's all you are going to pay attention to, is just ways to be broke, why you're still broke, why things ain't working, like those kind of things. The moving towards statements is just the opposite. I want to be wealthy. We'll just use that as the example. When you say I want to be wealthy, that is telling your brain what to start thinking about. And when your brain starts to think about being wealthy, now your brain is showing you ways to become wealthy. You start to think of ways that you can create wealth. So your language is extremely important. And the analogy I use for this is, think about any time, and because some people are like, well, that I had somebody told me that, well, that's just stupid. Well, let me give you an example. Think about any time you've ever been driving down the street and there's roadkill on the side of the road or right in the middle of the road. And maybe you don't see it because you're staggered off of the vehicle that's directly in front of you, and you're up a little bit closer, so you don't see the roadkill in time. But you have just enough time to swerve, but you're staring at the roadkill. What happens? You hit the roadkill because that's where your focus was. If you have time, now obviously time being an issue here, but let's say that front vehicle isn't there anymore and you have the roadkill coming at you. If you are focusing on the path around the roadkill, you will miss the roadkill. I went through an evasive driving school in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri years ago, and they were talking to us about drifting around corners. And they taught us, look through the turn. Don't look at the wall. Don't look where your hood is facing. Look through the turn. And if you're looking through the turn, that's where you're going to go. So where your focus is, where your language is going, that's the direction that you're going to take your life. Why? Because that's what you're indicating your brain is what you got to focus on.
Yeah. I've been up the ante for myself because I write affirmations out depending on where I'm at in my life and read them every morning. It's part of my routine. And I've even gone the next step where I'm instead of like I'm working on being wealthy, I am taking actions daily to become wealthy, because then I'm like focusing on action. So there's so many ways you can play with that, because it is so true. Last week was on a ski trip with my family, and my sister was there, and it was her birthday. So we went skiing, and it was a really narrow path. And she's like, this is really kind of freaking me out. And I said, don't look where you don't want to go. Look where you want to go. At the bottom of the hill, she's like, oh my gosh, that was incredible. I wasn't fearful anymore, and I was able to control myself. This is something I learned in mountain bike racing. And you look 20 feet ahead of you. You don't look where your wheel is, because and if you look over the curb or over the cliff or over the embankment, you're going to go down the embankment. There's just no way around it. So I love how you put that into the word mindset game, because that is 100% fact. I'll challenge anybody on that. 100%. You got to focus on where you want to go, where you're going, where you want to go.
Absolutely. Yeah. Language is vitally important of what direction you want your life to go in. Right. Yeah. And then the other one, plenty of guys, and I've been guilty, and this is the reason why I had the marital issues that I had, got kicked out. This is the reason why. Guys talk about, I'm not talking about my feelings. I'm not talking about my problems. I'm not talking about this. I'm not talking about that. And there's guys that even pride themselves in, man, I do real well at compartmentalizing. Yeah, you do. However, you're not doing such a good job because that compartmentalization is creating a lot of stress in your life. You're creating isolation. You're pushing people away. You're pushing your family away. And we think that we are playing a good game. We think that we are fooling everybody, but the only person we're fooling is ourselves, because those that know us well enough see straight through that. And who better to see straight through that than our kids and our spouse?
Yeah, for sure.
So the analogy I use for this one, I'm big on analogies. The analogy I use for this, and it's exactly what I did. Think about, I tell people that people are a lot like Coke bottles. When you shake up a 2-liter bottle of Coke, what happens to the inside? It becomes very pressurized, right? And then how the bottle at the beginning was a little bit flexible. Once you build that pressure inside, now it's extremely hard. And then when we pop that cap, it creates this explosion. We as people do the same thing when we don't talk about the things that we try to compartmentalize. When we don't talk about these things that are bothering us, we build up pressure on the inside. We become very rigid, very toxic, very negative people on the outside. And then somebody triggers us, and that creates that explosion. Now, that explosion could be anything from spousal abuse, child abuse, drug abuse, self-abuse, suicide, murder, crime, you name it. So, okay, so the question is, well, I'm already pressurized, now what? Well, you gotta pop that cap a little bit, and you gotta release some of that pressure. And you find somebody you trust, and you tell them what you're feeling. I just seen on social media, one of my Facebook friends had just posted one of their friends, and big burly dude committed suicide because, well, we're guys, we don't talk about that. No, release a little bit of that pressure. Talk about it a little bit. And once you start talking about these things and getting these things out, you start to release that pressure. Now you can take the cap completely off and start pouring it out. So then when you put the cap back on and you got maybe that much Coke left and you shake that bottle up, you might get a hiss or nothing at all. So guess what? You're no longer triggered because you've been able to talk about these things. The reason why so many guys walk around with a scowl on their face, in irritation and anger and this misunderstood masculinity, is because there are things going on internally that they're not willing to share. And that's the exact issue that I had when I had the affair on my wife, when I got kicked out of the Marine Corps after 13 years. When I told my wife, yeah, just move back up to Indiana, I'll stay down in North Carolina. Go ahead and take my newborn son too. I don't care.
Yeah, I think it comes to circles back also to vulnerability. A lot of men feel that sharing, talking through things is putting them in a vulnerable, dangerous position. I would say that another place for growth is the discomfort of vulnerability, because that is where you will grow. And so I think this is a really, really huge topic for men. In fact, just today, someone in the Brotherhood group posted that, there's times when they just get super frustrated, like, and just don't have a way to release that. And that's a point of vulnerability. They shared that. Now there's room for growth. And that's such an important message men need to hear, especially the more masculine, keep it inside. And I love I hate toxic masculinity because it's vilifying something that we are. We are masculine. We have testosterone. It is just the facts. Misunderstood masculinity. It's the first time I heard that, believe it or not. And I think it's an incredibly strong reframing of a popular term that needs to go away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the vulnerability absolutely is going to put you in a vulnerable spot. Dangerous? Absolutely not.
No, it's actually going to help you.
Yeah. Right. If you're vulnerable in a combat zone, or you're a cop and you're vulnerable on your beat, like, or in fire or something like that, like, yeah, of course. In jiu-jitsu, yeah, of course. But we as men, we have this issue with being vulnerable with our spouses. And again, I've been guilty of this. But why wouldn't you want to be vulnerable? Like, here's the thing. You go to bed with her every night, so you are in your most vulnerable you will ever be with anybody by sleeping next to her at night. By sharing that information of what's going on inside you, couple things. One, you're opening up. You're allowing that person in, for better or for worse, right? So you're letting that person in. That's going to build an even deeper connection, because when you don't share who you are with your spouse, that drives isolation.
Right.
And here's the other piece, and this is probably one of the biggest pieces that people that we as men have to understand. Our spouses don't have to understand. And we should hope they never do. This is a big conversation for vets a lot of times, because we as vets, we don't want to share the things that we've been through, maybe in combat or whatever, with our spouses. And a lot of times it's because, well, they're not going to understand. You're damn right they're not going to understand.
We wouldn't want them to, because it means they've been through it.
Hopefully they never do understand. They're not wanting you to share the information to understand. They're wanting you to share the information with them because they want you to be vulnerable with them. They want to feel connected to you. And when you don't share anything, when you don't talk about some of these things that you're dealing with, that drives isolation from the person you're supposed to be closest to.
Solid word. Solid. I refer to it as emotional intimacy. Women really need emotional intimacy. And part of that is just being vulnerable with them and sharing where your mind, where your heart, where your soul lies. Because like you said, we kind of agreed to be extremely vulnerable by the fact that we sleep with this woman every night. We are, it's about as vulnerable as you can get. Absolutely. Yeah. And so we're living a split life if we feel like we can be vulnerable in that way and not in another way. And I think there's some real cognitive dissonance that comes into play for men in that area, where they're really struggling. And the answer is quite simple. It's just share.
That's it.
Talk it out. They don't have to agree. And like you said, they don't have to understand. For them, it's just hearing and knowing and at least understanding the point, like the things going on in your head, not understanding why, but understanding what.
And a lot of times they, us as guys, we say, well, I'm not sharing it with them because I'm protecting them. We're not sharing it with them because we're trying to protect ourselves.
Yeah. That's a lie. That's a lie we tell ourselves, for sure.
Because it's extremely scary. It's extremely scary at first. I've had conversations with my wife that have been extremely vulnerable, but yeah, it was scary when, like, it was scary as hell before thinking about the conversation I'm about to have. Heart rate picks up, adrenaline spikes, everything. But now, hey, this is what's going on. This is how I'm feeling about it.
Yeah, uncomfortable conversations are part of being a man. It's
right.
If you can't have an uncomfortable conversation, then you have some real growth to go through, and that's just the reality of it.
Yep.
Well, man, I love your perspective. I love it. I love your story. Appreciate you for sharing that with us. I'm glad you're creating a legacy of growth with your son. I think we all can take something from that. And 8 will turn to 12, and 12 will turn to 15, and 15 will turn into 17. And that young man will be rearing to be an adult, will be prepared to be an adult, which is one of the things I believe is that we are called to prepare adults. We're not called to raise children. So it was awesome talking to you. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
All right. Thanks. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends, your family, and follow us on social media. If you are a father, make sure you join our Facebook group, the Brotherhood of Fatherhood. Hit the subscribe button and tune in next time for more podcasts from the Brotherhood of Fatherhood.